Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy. I'm a writer, and this is an educational YouTube series meant to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversations with other writers. Andrew Maust grew up in Ecuador, Honduras, and Costa Rica to missionary parents. After a few years teaching freshman composition, he found a job writing grants at a nonprofit in Mesa, Arizona. His creative work can be found in Mocking Heart Review, Radon Journal, The Purpled Nail, and Bright Flash Literary Review. In 2020, he was awarded a second-place prize in the Wurgle Flomp Humor Poetry Contest for his poem, The Challenge. And this is my conversation with Andrew.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, how are you?
Doing so well. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. So how are things going in Arizona? And happy anniversary.
Oh, thank you. So Arizona is very hot right now. July broke several records in terms of hottest average temperature or highest average temperature. And it also had the most consecutive days above 110 degrees with 31. So this is the wrong time to ask people in Arizona how they're doing, but kind of similar how in, State College, people aren't hanging out outside in the middle of January. People do more indoor activities, board game nights, movie nights. You don't see people, playing ultimate frisbee on the ice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And people who do things outdoors do things either really early or really late.
When you're less likely to get scorched.
Right. I've been playing volleyball. I'm terrible. I don't know why they let me keep playing, but I've been playing volleyball with some friends in the evenings, and we start around 7. And once the sun goes down, it helps a lot. But I'll look at the temperature, and it'll be 10 p.m. and the temperature is still 105.
Oh, that's painful. No, I'm glad that you're doing well and you haven't yet been scorched.
Right. Some sunburns, but I got sunburned in Pennsylvania and Louisiana. The sun is cruel to everyone.
This is true. There's just not enough SPF in the world.
Right.
So what are you working on now, and what motivated the project or projects?
I'm working on a lot of things. I have a series, I'm working on a series of tiny bird poems for a small press that is requesting tiny bird poems. And one of my friends in my writing group found it, and so we've all been writing these little micro poems, maybe 15 lines max. So I'm trying to hammer one of those out each day and try to pick from a selection of those to submit. Like all fiction writers, I have a novel project. Mine is about someone who joins a book club and unknowingly joins a doomsday cult in a very funny way. It's a little Terry Pratchett-y, which is probably my biggest inspiration in terms of tone. That's one that I work on just for fun. I'm not sure if it'll ever see the light of day, but you never know.
That sounds like a wonderful project, and I hope it does see the light of day.
Me too. I'm at the point where it's a lot of fun, and I know it's not good yet. I don't know, and I'm still in the very first draft phase. A few chapters have been revised, but I know it still has a lot of work to do. But I have a lot of fun writing it. I have a lot of fun reading it. I get excited telling other people about it, which I think is a good sign.
Are these like standalone chapters? So could they function as short stories if you submitted them somewhere? Or are they just all connected and you need the previous chapter to understand what's going on?
I've thought about submitting a couple of chapters as standalone works. It is sequential. Every chapter is connected to the ones that came before, and it's slowly building and building as the main character learns more and more about this book club and some of the quirks that it has. There is one chapter that I think could work as a standalone short story with a little bit of editing, where he realizes that he's in a cult, and he decides, there's a lot of other book clubs, and he finds one at a bookstore, and it ends up being all middle-aged women who are reading these steamy romance fictions, and he feels so out of place, and he doesn't know what to do. And they weren't expecting to see him there, because this is just them and their friends. They meet at this bookstore, and they definitely didn't expect this young bookish accountant who's very dry, and he ends up being so uncomfortable and so unwelcome that he ends up going back to the cult, which I think is one of the ways that cults in real life do prey on people, where they find people who aren't fitting in elsewhere and maybe have been rejected from other places and make them feel comfortable enough that they don't recognize the danger, or they think the danger is worth it. I think that one alone could work standalone. We'll see.
I think this sounds amazing.
Like I said, I get excited telling other people about it, and telling other people about it makes me want to write it, more of it, which is, a very positive feedback loop.
So, what have you learned about yourself through writing?
One thing I've learned about myself is that I'm not a perfectionist. I have other friends who write, and I feel like they work really hard to get things perfect. And a lot of times I will get something to where I like it, and I'm very comfortable with that. And I think that's an advantage and a disadvantage. A lot of times I think people do get trapped in this mentality of, oh, it's not good enough yet. It's not good enough yet. And I'm reading these things. I think it's pretty good. You should go ahead and submit it. And I think it's very vulnerable to send things out. And I also am aware that everything can always be improved. So if I submit it and it does get rejected, I can revisit it and think, okay, now how can we polish this up? What could the reviewer have been responding to? And sometimes you don't know. I have a short story about an artificial limb with its own AI or an intelligence, essentially, and its host was hiking and falls, and it's trying to save the host. I sent that out to a couple of places, and I get form rejections. So I don't know if it's a story that was almost there, and it just had elements that didn't work for them, or if they were like, oh, we accepted 2 robotic arm stories already, and this is the 3rd one this month. We can't be the robotic arm magazine. That's not what we want to be. I always try to temper those, especially form rejection, because there's so many reasons why good stories get rejected, but also bad stories. So
My guess is it's not a bad story, but even with digital publication, there's still a limited amount of space.
There is. And I think that's very true. There's also an idea if for paying markets, that space is dictated often by the budget. For non-paying markets, it's an artificial limit based on what the editors want to present. And I always find that so fascinating that the website host doesn't have any limit on how many stories you can post, or rather, any storage limit would be astronomically high that is irrelevant. But you also, all editors need to be discerning and decide what belongs and what doesn't.
Exactly. So for your day job, you do a lot of grant writing and proposal writing. How does your creative writing and essay experience inform your approach to grant and proposal writing?
I think was a fairly seamless transition. Writing a proposal is very much like writing an essay, where you have your main claim, this is what we want to do, and this is what we need to do it. And then you have all the supporting evidence to back it up. A lot of them have required forms that you fill out from paragraph to paragraph. Some of them are more free form, where you just start out with a blank document and you have more freedom in how you organize those points. But you think of, oh, how can I build our ethos, for example? Well, this organization has been operating in the region for 50 years. We have 25 years of doing the relevant, homelessness shelter experience, and you kind of build a case, persuade the reader to grant you the funds. And there's also degrees of success. There have been times when we've been awarded the full amount requested. There have been times when we've been awarded half or 75%. There's also times when places have come back to us and given us more than we requested, and that's always a big surprise. But I think a lot of this comes down to knowing your audience and understanding what their priorities are. We'll write some grants I mostly work on government grants, but we'll write some to the city, and each city has their own 5-year plan, 10-year plan, and you have to look at how their priorities align with what your project is doing. We would write some to the state, and the state also has their plan, and they'll probably overlap with the city a little bit, but their priorities are going to be a little bit different. Maybe there's a bigger influence on a housing first policy than the city necessarily has. And we follow a housing first policy, so we emphasize that even more in that state application. So I think there's that audience analysis that is crucial to, fictional writing, to essay writing, to professional writing. Like I talked about before with editors. Every editor has something that they want to present for their publication. And the more you understand that editor and what they want to represent, the better your chances are at getting an acceptance.
That's great. So I'm guessing that research is really critical in all of these elements. Yeah.
Of course. And research can be in terms of describing the need for our services and gathering information from our local or our regional continuum of care, which collects homelessness data. It can be looking up domestic violence statistics that have been published by the state. It can be looking up other studies. It can also be internal. We have to. I might collect information from staff and say, "Oh, we don't. This isn't regularly recorded in our demographics, but how many trans individuals did we serve? We have a blanket group for LGBTQ plus, but how many of those were trans individuals? Because there might be a scope of work requirement that speaks to that specifically, and I want to make sure that I'm representing that accurately. And sometimes that involves calling people up when they don't answer emails, or almost feels a little bit like an interview where I have like a list of questions that I need answers for. I really enjoy it. It's a lot more people focused than I expected.
So what's the role or responsibility of writing for you? What keeps you generating material? Why write?
So I think there's a lot of reasons. For my day job, I write because it gives me a paycheck. It also is a way of investing in my community and getting resources directed to where they need to go. And so I think I'm often reminded of the big difference that writing can make sometimes, and I think that can translate to creative works. I think a lot of people, but for me, my creative works are a little more selfish. I write more to entertain myself than anything else. And I think if the publishing market was a little bit different these days, that might not be the case. But when you might get paid $100 max for a short story or a poem that you get published, I think that you really do need to have other structures in place in order to earn a job creative writing. And I do know, if you have a book project, you can get an advance. But I know very few full-time writers. And a lot of the ones who I do know who are full-time writers, have a partner who also works or have other types of support. So I think there's a lot that can go into how much you can produce and how much effort you can invest, but also into how much you can write for other people rather than yourself. I think that's really important and useful. But for me, I write what I want to write, and there's a little bit of freedom in that as well, because it's not my full-time job.
When you're struggling to write, what do you do to help get yourself back to the page? Do you have different strategies for different genres?
My biggest strategy, probably across all genres, is to talk to other people about my idea. I think I'm a bit of a verbal processor, but I also get excited. It reminds me about why I like this idea, why I'm excited about it. And, seeing people's reactions can help me think, what I think is great about this story might not be what's resonating with this person, but they're latching onto this small thing that I hadn't thought was that big of a part of a story. And maybe I can grow and develop that element more. Or the same thing in essay writing. Sometimes I'll have an essay and someone will, focus in on one of my points, and I'll realize that point actually is what the essay should be. So I'll shift the thesis statement around. And it happens in proposal writing sometimes as well, but a little less often because I usually know exactly what I'm requesting and what it's for.
So what revision strategy or strategies do you find most helpful when revising your own work, and why? What problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
My favorite revision strategy is probably peer review. And maybe that's because I just like sharing my work with other people. But when I was teaching, I would always have my students peer review each other's works for every draft or every project we did. At least one draft would require a peer review. And I think that's such a valuable way of understanding how other people might see your work. There's been ways when I've had language that didn't come, that was honestly problematic, and someone else pointed out, and everyone has blind spots. I was very thankful that someone pointed out, oh, this usage is probably not something you want to include. I was like, oh, absolutely right. I didn't even think about this image in that way. At my work, I also, my teammates also look over our drafts before we send them out to our funders. And I think that's extremely useful. Everyone misses things. When I don't have a peer review group available, or if there's going to be some time before I can meet with them, I read my stuff out loud. I started doing this first. Well, I've done this for a long time. I find it's especially helpful in poetry because for me, a lot of poetry has a sonic quality and a rhythm and helps you find those lines that look right on page. And even the iams, when you mess with the iams, if you were doing anything structured like that, seem to fit, but something doesn't feel right about the order of the words, or the way the stresses are falling, or maybe it ends on a very weak stress. But I think reading through prose is especially useful as well. It helps you find repetition, or rather unintended repetition. It helps you find sections that might be a little bit grammatically confusing, catches all kinds of typos. Just a very simple step.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Peer review is one of the most valuable activities that we have because it's always helpful to have that extra perspective or that extra set of eyes to help you catch the mistakes. And then reading things out loud is super helpful too. And normally, what I would do is print it out because sometimes I'm finding myself, I still miss things if it's on a digital screen because I think that digital space just requires us to read so much faster. So printing it out is something that I found useful too, to read it aloud.
Yeah, I definitely have done that. And sometimes, it's useful to make notes with a pencil and also to be removed from the screen. A lot of times when I have, like if I'm reading something on a screen, I'll hear a Facebook notification or I'll see an email pop up in the corner and it's easy to get distracted. I come back and maybe I don't start off from exactly where I was because I've already written this work, maybe read it through a few times and I don't quite remember where I was. I think printing out, removes those distractions. It allows you to make marks on text. I think there's a tactile element there, and this is making me sound like one of the professors I've worked with who are very critical of technology. But I do think that there is a tactile effect that you gain through doing that with a pen in your hand. It just activates a slightly different part of your brain.
So, what's your favorite part of the writing process and why?
My favorite part is coming up with a new idea and getting excited about it and immediately writing it down. I've had stories where I've sat down and spewed out maybe 2,000 or 3,000 words, and a lot of times I'm very happy with them when I'm done. I know that they'll need to be revised, but I've had this concept in full and it's been executed. It's happened sometimes with the with my novel projects, less often because I think there's the big idea is already the novel itself. But a lot of times my favorite poems or short stories are ones that I sat down and completed at least a draft in that first sitting. I find a lot of times if I don't at least get a draft on page, I lose a little bit of the excitement. And even if it ends up being very good, I'm never as thrilled with it as I am when I am in that moment of mania. I also think that that's a little bit, works a little bit against me as well, because I think all writers have experienced a moment of inspiration. And the writing advice that I've heard over and over again is to write every day, which means writing when you don't have any ideas. And you write a paragraph and you think, that's, I didn't have any ideas, and this paragraph doesn't have any ideas in it. And it doesn't feel like you're making progress. But there have been other times when I've sat down, didn't have any ideas, and something clicked and inspiration struck. So I think that's, for me, I'm always trying to chase that, like that spark of an idea, of a new idea, and that excitement that comes with it, because I think that is what fuels my writing more than anything.
What reading suggestions do you have? What writers do you keep in your back pocket?
So many. I always feel bad about these questions because anytime someone asks me, I'll name off a few of my favorites. I love Connie Willis, Octavia Butler, Neil Gaiman, G.K. Chesterton. And afterwards, I feel like, oh, how could I have forgotten, Zora Neale Hurston or Kafka. Oh, I love Kafka. He wasn't on my list that I had jotted down. And I think I feel a little bit like the kid who has all the stuffed animals, but they don't want any of them to feel left out. So they bring them all on the trip. And these authors, some of them are long dead. The ones who aren't, Most of them don't know I exist. Their feelings aren't going to be hurt by being left out of this list, probably. But I feel this kind of personal attachment to like each of these authors. I think they all feel like they reflect a little bit of who I am, because there's different reasons why I like each of these authors. You know, Neil Gaiman and Kafka might have a little bit of overlap, but they're very different. I get very different things out of what they write. Margaret Atwood, another one that I should have mentioned. Two books that I recently read that just floored me were Love in the Time of the Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I thought that was phenomenal. And the Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I thought that was also a spectacular read. And those are the two from this past year that I think that have impressed me the most, that have immediately skyrocketed to books I recommend to others.
Thank you for that wonderful reading list. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I've learned so much.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you for offering to let me do this. I'm very excited to be part of this series.